Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you'll be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. If you've been inspired by the guests that we've had on the podcast, please like, subscribe, comment, hit notification bells, whatever you can do on the platforms that you're listening on, so that more people have the opportunity of hearing these and engaging in our community. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne. Our guest today is Ben John, now or Benjamin John, however people may know you by. But for people that don't know who you are, could you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Great, thank you so much, Andrew and Daphne, for having me on. So I'm Ben John, based in London. I work for an organisation called Christian Concern, which seeks to speak of the name of Jesus Christ in public life, and in particular I work on our Wilberforce Academy, which is our work equipping and supporting students and young professionals to engage on some of the key cultural issues facing Christians in the West today. I'm also involved in the Church of England General Synod, which is the governing body of the Church of England. So I'm an elected lay member for the Diocese of St Albans. I can explain what that means later. And that means that I can have a voice and a vote on matters of legislation and doctrine in the Church of England.
Okay, and for people listening to this, they want to find out more about you or Christian Concern, where can they do that?
Yeah, well, you can find out more about Christian Concern at christianconcern.com and Wilberforce Academy at wilberforceacademy.org.uk. The Wilberforce Academy is a 1-week residential program for students and young professionals. So if people know young people who are interested in understanding more about issues like LGBT, abortion, Islam, and how we as Christians can have a positive voice into those issues, then the Wilberforce Academy is certainly the right program for them. So our applications, you can find out about how to apply for that on the Wilberforce Academy website.
That will be a very useful thing to highlight in the light of our mission, which is to equip them for such a time as this, literally. Yeah. So maybe we can go into that more.
Yeah, and some of the things that we'll talk about in this conversation as well will be a really useful tool for people going, oh, wow, okay, so how can we actually respond to some of these issues that we'll dive into. But before we get into some of those subjects, and for people listening, those links, I'll get them. They'll be in the description box, so they're ready for you to go and find. Check those out. Ben, for people that don't know about you, your background, where you grew up, can you just give us some of that?
Yes, I grew up in Chorleywood, and I'm still connected to the church there, where I grew up. I grew up in a Christian home. My father was an evangelist, and so I've always been involved in church work, or seeing it growing up. But for the last 5 years, I went to university and studied economics. After I graduated from that, I very, very briefly worked in management consulting, but I left that when the opportunity came to join Christian Concern. So I actually attended the Wilberforce Academy myself when I was a student, and it had a really big impact on me in really sort of reorienting the trajectory of my life, really, and thinking about what's important, what are the issues that Christians need to be having a voice in today, and how can we as Christians be engaging in the culture on those kinds of issues. Grew up in Chorleywood in a Christian home, very involved in church there, still involved in church there, and it was after university that I got connected to Christian Concern and Wilberforce Academy.
Growing up, did you have other dreams of things that you would like to do, or did you always think, you know what, I've seen how ministry was for my parents, and I want to be a part of that?
No, actually, no, definitely not. Growing up, I initially actually wanted to be a filmmaker. So I was quite interested I went to a summer school in filmmaking when I was 16. And I used to love films growing up. So I initially thought that, and I did acting and stuff in school plays and when I was younger as well. So I initially thought that was going to be what I did, and then when I was kind of 17, 18, I kind of lost that passion a bit and went and did economics because I wasn't really sure what to do. I was quite good at maths, and thought that was quite a good way to use that. So went and did an economics degree, and if you do an economics degree, generally you're expected to go into finance or banking or consulting or something like that. So I sort of followed the crowd in doing that. Didn't particularly enjoy it, and so was thankful then. I think when I'd been on the Wilberforce Academy myself, I think I kind of realized and saw there was a bit of a gap in the way the church was speaking or contending on issues like LGBT and abortion. And so there was a big shift in my life and thinking, which came to, what am I most passionate about? And I mean, ultimately most passionate about Jesus, but also realizing that through these issues, there's opportunities for us to talk about Jesus because there are ways in which we as the church are distinct from the culture. So why don't we highlight those distinctions rather than shy away from them and use them as an opportunity for us to preach the gospel?
So have you had a fairly consistent life of following Jesus? I mean, I realise that through teenage years and everything, everybody have their dips, and that's not like I'm always 100%. But you haven't had a moment where you said, no, this isn't for me.
No, I had long periods of living a double life where I probably wasn't submitting to Christ. Well, no, I definitely wasn't submitting to Christ as Lord over all my life. And it was whilst I was kind of at university when I was realizing that either Christ means everything or nothing. I don't think I ever really doubted faith or doubted God or Christ or the resurrection. So I never really had those apologetic type questions. It was really more a case of, am I willing to let go of my own idols in my heart, my own sin, and pursue Christ wholeheartedly rather than kind of this lukewarmness that there probably was. So so I've always been in church. I've never been I've never been a full-on prodigal, but certainly there would be question marks. Depends what day you catch me on when I would answer when I became a Christian. Certainly my sanctification didn't really begin until I was at university.
Your testimony may be something be presumptuous like mine, but when people ask me when I became a Christian, I just go, always. It rocks people's theology a bit, but if you've grown up in a family where your parents are passionately sold out for Jesus, I think you enter the kingdom as a natural course, as opposed to having to have this major moment when everything changes. Because when you've grown up in a Christian family, in one sense, nothing changes. You've always been to church, you've always loved Jesus, you've always prayed and the rest of it. And so I suspect you're...
I agree. The promise is to our children and our children's children to the 1,000th generation. So
yeah,
I would agree with you. I would agree with you there that I never want to place too much emphasis on people needing to have a conversion experience, but the blessing of a boring testimony. Of course, no testimony is boring, but
we call it the testimony of David. "O Lord, from my youth I have known you."
Yes.
And we mustn't go down this route because this isn't.
Yeah, this is a whole other direction.
But in one of our conferences, we do one on the hidden testimony, and sadly, because that testimony is hidden, it's not exposed, not on the platform. We meet many young people who doubt their salvation because they can't remember that moment, and who even say, "I've thought of falling away from God to get a testimony." So that's a whole other. You've hit on one of our topics,
messages.
Yeah, but let's get back to Ben before we go trundling down the river.
Well, this is about Ben. It's his testimony.
Yeah. So what path you went to the Wilberforce Academy. Okay, we know the name Wilberforce. We know the name Academy. Can you put all that together? Why the Wilberforce Academy?
Yeah, and you say we know about Wilberforce. I think that in England, a lot more people know the name Wilberforce.
True.
More people should know, but like when we travel in the US and we talk about the abolition of slavery and all that kind of stuff, and sometimes we'll say to people, do you know who William Wilberforce is? And they have no idea. And so actually there are quite a lot of people listening that may not actually know who William Wilberforce is. You might want to just summarize who that is as well.
Yeah, so William Wilberforce was a British parliamentarian who led the parliamentary campaign for the abolition of the slave trade across the British Empire. So he was pivotal in that, and of course many others were involved in the campaign on different fronts. But he was the figurehead and the pioneer in the parliamentary campaign. And probably without his work, the abolition of the slave trade would have been pushed back decades, if not more. So he was a gifted orator, campaigner, and also evangelical Christian. And so he wrote a lot about how his faith was what was driving him to do what he did. He wrote a book on practical Christianity, so I mean, he is a particular personal hero of mine. There's many great biographies written about him, so I encourage anyone to check those out, Pollock or William Hague. William Wilberforce, parliamentary campaigner for the abolition of the slave trade. He, as I mentioned, he viewed his faith as the driving factor for it, and so we call our Wilberforce Academy because of our view that it's our faith that drives us to contend on modern issues of injustice or cultural challenges. So when we speak about LGBT, when we speak about abortion, which may be the most obvious one, we're wanting to do it out of a place of wanting to glorify God and proclaim the lordship of Christ over all of society. It's not about being socially conservative. It's not about being anti-woke, whatever that means. It's about honoring Christ in all that we do. And that includes not just in our personal lives and in our hearts, but in society as well. So we believe that we're, as kingdom ambassadors, ambassadors of reconciliation, Paul calls us. Yes, we do evangelism, but evangelism to what end? The glory of God. And how do we do that? By submitting all things unto him. So the Wilberforce Academy is really about encouraging young people to see all that they do as service to the Lord. And that's not just legal campaigning. And it's not really just about those issues, LGBT, abortion, euthanasia. It's also about just everyday life where Christians are. I think whether that's medics, politics, law, arts, education, business, whatever it might be, you can do it as service to the Lord, honoring to him and glorifying him. So really our Wilberforce Academy is, think about Christian culture engagement and what that looks like. And also, what does it mean to live out the Lordship of Christ where God has placed you?
Of course, if you did I don't know how long the Academy's been going. When was it started?
It started in 2010. So we do events during the year, but the main event is our residential in September. So this year we've got a 1-week residential program where it's teaching and
No, it's all right, go on.
So mixture of teaching, devotionals, small group time, sung worship, fellowship. So it's a really great time. So we get about 80 that come. And really one of the real blessings of it is the fellowship and the community that's formed. So many people meet very close friends. So I was an usher at a wedding just a few months ago. It's someone that I attended the Wilberforce Academy with back in 2016. So some of my best friends are the people I can say that I met on the Wilberforce Academy. It's also really diverse without really any kind of attempts at trying to be diverse. It's really a group of Christians from across denominations, across different backgrounds, but united in a love for Jesus, and a passion to see him proclaimed across society. So I think that's a real unique strength of the Wilberforce Academy. And another one would be just the amazing teaching that there is. So it's a mixture of the how and why of Christian culture engagement. Should we engage the culture? What does that mean? What does that look like? What does that look like in your sphere? But also, what does it look like on the key challenges facing Christians in the UK and the West today? Looking at it from both the kind of macro and micro. So how do I witness to my homosexual friends on my course? But also, why is the conversion therapy legislation a danger to us? And I think many don't know how to, we maybe think about one but not the other. And so it's really about trying to give this overview for young people in their witnessing, who are kind of in one sense in the front lines of being bombarded with the ideologies of the world, particularly at university or, you know, recent graduate jobs and things like that. So really equipping and supporting them.
Of course, 2010 to 2023, what you are confronting these young people with has changed dramatically. What you're asking of them is changed dramatically, and what you're asking them in terms of take up their cross and follow me has changed dramatically. Do you see a generation rising who are saying, yeah, we're ready for this challenge, just equip us and we're good to go?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think in particular the community aspect is what particularly encourages that, because I think many young people today is quite lonely, maybe being an Orthodox Christian, engaging on some of these issues and quite scared to, you know, of course, there's many good churches that are doing a lot of good teaching on some of these issues. I think sometimes the church at times has failed to understand maybe some of the more macro challenges facing Christians today. So it's come quite late for the churches to have a voice on, say, the conversion therapy legislation. And so I think supporting Christians in understanding these are the challenges, these are the costs, but Christ is worth it. So each year it's always such an encouragement to me seeing this large group of young people who are passionate, sold out for Christ, who don't care about losing everything for him, because they know that, yeah, it's worth it to live as Christ, to die as gain.
Yeah. You weren't there, obviously, when Wilberforce, what was it called? Institute? Academy. My goodness.
I thought you were going to say he wasn't there when Wilberforce
was there,
alive.
which, I mean, that would be a miracle. Yeah. But you said it started in 2010. Now, you weren't there when it started, but for people in other countries, you know, they may still see England as a Christian nation. Maybe in America, they don't quite know what's going on in terms of society and our culture at the minute. Could you maybe just talk about where is England now in terms of Christianity? What is its the culture, society at large? What is it like right now?
It's a really good question. So I change my mind a lot on how optimistic, pessimistic I am on how I evaluate the current state of the nation. I think at the moment we're living off the last remnants of our Christian heritage, but that Christian heritage is still there in various aspects of our law and government. The fact that we still have an established church, and so we're still living off that legacy. I think in the past it probably would be fair to say I do believe England was a Christian. I believe in the concept of a Christian nation, but every Christian nation would be imperfect. And I think what we're seeing now is there's the last few things we're holding on to from our Christian legacy, but we've tried to build a society without that root, that Christian foundation. And now we're seeing the bad fruit of that in our society. So when we've moved away from the Bible when it comes to, say, sexual ethics. That's what happens over 2 or 3 generations. That's led us to where we are now, where we have widespread divorce, cohabitation, homosexuality, transgenderism. And so we're seeing what happens in a kind of post-Christian nation. But at the same time, I'm still optimistic for the future that the gospel is powerful. The gospel is still growing. People are still coming to Christ. But our cultural Christianity has nearly gone. Amongst the elderly, you'd still have a degree of nominal Christianity, and of course, nominal Christianity is isn't conversion, and you want people to have new hearts. But at the same time, in terms of general living, cultural Christianity is probably preferable to cultural paganism in many senses. And so as a society, as we embrace apostasy, as we embrace pagan, false worship, we're seeing the fruits of that, and it's devastating our culture.
Yeah, I heard, I think it was a clip actually of Mike Pilavachi talking to your dad on his show, Facing the Canon, right? Mm-hmm. And for people that don't know, Mike Pilavachi has headed up massive festivals in the UK with tens of thousands of young people that come together every year. Your dad asked him, what do you see in this next generation? And Mike said something to the effect of, when I was young, I would read the Bible to see how it could change me. In this next generation, he sees a lot of them reading the Bible to see how they can change it. Which was like, wow, like that's a powerful statement that you've put out there. And I think you're seeing, we'll talk more specifically about the church in a bit. When you start to see the society and the culture shifting from that sort of traditionally held Christian views, what are some of the consequences of that? What are we starting to see happen in England, even around issues of freedom of speech? I think, people can get caught up on what specific sins is it the church is talking about and addressing those. But you can drop in any sin which is from a traditional Christian perspective. You can drop any of those in. You have similar kinds of conversations that come out of it. But what are we starting to see happen in England as a result of us moving away from these sort of Christian foundations?
Yeah, I guess there's twofold. There's in society and in the church. And I guess in society, we're increasingly seeing more restrictions on freedom of speech. We're seeing increased or reduced rights for Christians and for parents as well. So I know you do a lot of work on generations. We've been supporting a mother, Izzy Montague, has been in the press recently, who was refused by her school to take her 4-year-old out of a gay pride march in the primary school, her child. And the school had said, you're not allowed to take them out. So it would have been an unauthorized absence. So we've been challenging that. And in fact, when she met with the headmistress to talk about it, the headmistress's daughter, who was also at the school, came to the meeting and wore a jumper or a t-shirt saying, why be homophobic, transphobic, and bigoted when you can just be quiet? So we're increasingly seeing hostility to parents there in our education system. Many organizations are promoting LGBT issues at younger and younger ages. We're seeing freedom of speech issues where people are getting arrested for or losing their jobs for articulating orthodox Christian positions on matters. It should have come out by now, so I don't know when it will come out, and hopefully I don't know if it'll come out by the time this podcast is released, but Bernard Randall was a chaplain at a Christian evangelical ethos private school, and he was sacked for saying it's okay if you disagree on LGBT matters. It's okay if you hold to an orthodox position. He was sacked from an evangelical ethos school, and he was a chaplain. And he was actually reported, initially he was reported to Prevent, which is the government's anti-extremism task force. So that's just an example of some of the challenges that we're facing. We're facing there. Street preachers regularly are being arrested by police, sometimes for being offensive. Sometimes there's an excellent track record on us on defending street preachers and holding back the law on that, where there's attempts to try and shut down the gospel when it comes to public proclamation. In the church, I think what we're seeing, and so just a few weeks ago, I was at General Synod, and at General Synod, they've voted to, basically, we voted to proceed on, there's lots of nuances on the way that they worded the motion, but basically to proceed on publishing blessings for same-sex marriages and relationships. And it's likely going to be that come July, it will be, there'll be some form of new pastoral guidance, which will probably say, it's speculative at the moment, but I think it's likely to say that clergy can enter into same-sex civil marriages and civil partnerships, and they don't need to abstain from sodomy. So that's probably going to be the pastoral guidance that gets published before July. So in July, which will be the next meeting of the General Synod, we'll be discussing and debating that. And so what we'll see is, I think that's going to have serious cultural consequences when the established church, and people can debate the wisdom in having an established church, but there's a reality here in England that we have an established church, and having an established church that ceases to teach the apostolic gospel, it will have spiritual consequences for the nation and other churches as well. How much harder it will be to hold to an orthodox position when even the national established church doesn't. And so I think that's going to cause serious problems for us down the line. I think it will hinder our evangelism because the Spirit won't be there. Ichabod, the glory will depart. God's hand won't be on the Church of England. And I think that'll be one of the last few. I often thought the official end of Christendom would probably be when the Queen dies and the Church of England endorses gay marriage, and it looks like those have happened there, because those are happening very, very soon. The Church of England won't officially change the doctrine of marriage, or they won't attempt to try and change the doctrine of marriage for a few years. I'm a little bit more optimistic that we can block that. So one of the reasons I'm on Synod is really to try and block the liberalising of the theological positions on homosexuality. Sadly, what the bishops are doing by forcing through these prayers. So yes, there was a vote, but the vote didn't really have any. The vote wasn't really to approve the prayers. It was just simply to acknowledge the bishop's decisions. And it was quite a close vote. The bishops are forcing these prayers through. I believe it illegally, according to church law, because they're saying these prayers of blessing for same-sex relationships does not indicate a change in the doctrine of marriage. If it did indicate a change, they'd have to go through a different route. And of course, anyone with eyes can see that this is a change of doctrine, or certainly indicative of a change of doctrine, which is the official legal definition. Is if it's indicative of a change of the doctrine, then it has to go through a different process.
I'm not surprised, but the general message that is often given, this is something that's happening in the emerging generation, the whole woke culture, etc., etc. But when you're talking bishops and these clergy, my impression are this is not the emerging generation. This is the generations that have come before them, and that they are older people. I won't call them old people, but older people. So are you seeing an embracing by all generations of what's happening, particularly in the Church of England?
I think in general this would be embraced generally more widely amongst younger people. if you look at so recently, Christian Concern, one of our sort of research teams did some analysis of the churches in the Church of England with the largest youth groups, and all of them were evangelical. And there might be other reasons why we might say that, but there isn't any evidence of churches going liberal and then growing. So churches with a lot of young people are generally evangelical, and generally there might be churches with a focus on youth work for various reasons. And I'm sure we could spend hours discussing the pros and cons of that. So I don't think. I think it's a lie to say young people in general are embracing this, and also at Synod. So I'm one of the younger members of Synod. Myself and a few other younger members of Synod who were all there spoke during the debate against the proposals, sort of highlighting that actually this isn't universal amongst young people. You don't need to change the doctrine of marriage to reach young people. I think with the older generation, I think generally older generations are just a bit more traditional, maybe for the wrong reasons. So they might just be traditional. They might just think, I know someone who just thinks homosexuality is a bit un-British. It's a bit more than that. I think with the bishops, I think they have let particular voices in to their surroundings, and that they've allowed that to change their theology. They've let morality shape theology rather than theology shape morality. I think what we often see is a bishop will say that he knew a faithful, stable, same-sex couple and saw that the love that they had for each other. And so then he went back to the scriptures afresh to look at it. And, this is basically what the Bishop of Oxford said. He basically said, I wanted to find gay marriage being approved in the Bible because I had gay friends. And I wanted to be able to affirm their love. And he says, all my pastoral instincts told me that gay marriage was fine, even if my theological instincts told me otherwise. That's basically what the Bishop of Oxford said. And so I think that's often what's happened. I think there's a fear of man amongst the bishops who are afraid to be hated by the world. They've chosen friendship with the world, which is enmity against God. They think that what they're going to do will be missional and will get people into the church. They've heard lots of sad stories, and there are often, of course, I don't think anyone would deny that there's not bad stories of, people who are struggling with their sexuality or gender, who go into a church and maybe not received well. There hasn't been very pastoral. I'm sure that happens with all kinds of issues. Churches are fallible. I'm sure ministers often get pastoral matters not quite right. But that's become we need to apologize for all of these things. And it wasn't even quite clear. So one aspect of the motion that was voted on was apologize for the harm to LGBTQ plus people, harm caused by the church. And a lot of the liberals were upset by the motion because they're saying, well, why are you what we're upset about is not being able to marry, and you're not changing that. And so you're still harming us. And yet the bishops seem to tolerate a lot of these voices in their ears. I think the proposals takes the bishops outside. I think the bishops in the past, they crossed my red line, my personal red line, about 5 years ago, when they published guidance celebrating gender transitions services. So they said, here's some guidance on how you can celebrate people's transitions. And to me, that was a kind of red line that took them out of orthodoxy. So when I was welcomed into Synod, there was a communion service at Westminster Abbey, which I attended but refused communion at because I don't recognise the bishops and the archbishops. And I think now with these prayers, more churches need to be willing to just completely cut off their bishops. And that might come with legal and cost. That might come with a cost. But it's easier for me to say that as a lay person, where there's less direct personal cost to me. But ministers who are in place, who have jobs, who have homes, I think now's not the time to leave. I don't believe in leaving the Church of England, but now's the time to not recognise the bishops who I believe have led the church into error and who are whoring themselves with Baal.
Some of these.
Didn't we read that there was a move to do that for the Archbishop? Were we reading that?
You read something. I think it was that internationally, some of the bishops have voted to not recognise the Archbishop of Canterbury or something.
Yeah. So the Global South Fellowship of Anglicans recently published a statement basically saying they no longer see the Archbishop of Canterbury as the first among equals in the Anglican Communion. GAFCON, which is the Global African Futures Conference, they're meeting actually in April in Rwanda and I guess there'll be an update about that then. But they've also issued a statement condemning what's happened and the vote and the motions and what the bishops are doing. And so what's happening is fracturing the worldwide Anglican Communion, but that's slightly different to what do faithful Anglicans in England now do, who are actually under these bishops.
Some of these things that you're talking about, and we're talking specifically here about the Church of England because this is, the ocean you swim in. But for people around the world, in America, there are independent churches which are making similar decisions to this. And you said, I don't think now's the time to leave. Just don't recognise your pastor or whatever. So
the exact details of what it means, I think my uncomfortability with, I don't have an issue with people leaving. I think leaving may well be right for people who can't minister in the Church of England according to their conscience, and that may well be the right thing at this time. There is a concern about if you leave your church now, do you open up your own church to be taken over by? If you can't lead your whole congregation out, do you open up your church to be taken over by a wolf? And what responsibility does a minister have to protect their own sheep from his own successor? So I think that's a factor to consider. I think more thought needs to go into what the plans would be, but something along the lines of rejecting the bishop, coming under an alternative bishop. So there are Anglican networks in England who aren't in the Church of England, Anglican churches. So there are various networks. So some people generally leave the Church of England to join one of those networks. I'd probably look at asking those bishops to oversee you, but whilst remaining in the Church of England. I don't particularly believe in negotiating with false teachers for some kind of settlement, which is a strategy that quite other evangelicals are trying to consider as well. So in America, there's been a big split in the Anglican Church. So what the Episcopal Church is now quite liberal. No, it's completely liberal. It's in decline. They've firmly embraced gay marriage, and the Anglican Church of North America are the faithful Orthodox Anglicans, and that's growing, and they're being faithful. And so that split happened quite a while ago in the past. In the Church of England, it's different as well. Maybe this is comfortable and we like the privilege, but there is a difference between the fact that the Church of England is the established church, and so holding on to fight for as long as possible with integrity and without compromise, I do think is right and good. But that requires withdrawing any kind of affiliation or support from false teachers.
What would you say to people that say, well, you have these beliefs, but they are hateful towards these people? Show love, show compassion to them, be more accepting of them. What would you say to people that say that about the church? It's just hateful.
I had an email just like that yesterday, but I would say, is it loving to let people not know the truth? And is it loving to let people stay in their sin? So we're called to speak the truth in love with mercy. So, in Jude, contending for the faith, towards the end, it talks about us speaking and rebuking with mercy, but also talks about snatching them from the fire. And so I think we need to call people away from their sin and call them to Christ. We want to offer people Jesus, and that's where they can find true love. I also think we need to redefine what we think love is, or not redefine as in go back to true love, which we find ultimately in the person of Jesus Christ. But love isn't following all my feelings or all my desires, and love isn't allowing any kind of sexual practice to go on as it should. There's a reality that, it's unpopular to say it's that faithful, stable, same-sex relationships are sinful and ultimately are unloving, because that's not what we're made for. We're made for something greater than that, which is communion with Christ, but also, and this isn't always going to be for everyone, but marriage between a man and a woman paints a much more beautiful picture of Christ and the church, and also the complementarity, the ability for procreation. Actually, same-sex sexual relationships are, in one sense, unloving. I mean, Paul in Romans 1 describes them as shameful.
Can I just take it back to more personal level for you? What consequences have you had for yourself in taking a stand? I mean, there could be good ones, or there could be some that are not so good. What has happened for you?
So, my work's not the most popular work,
Exactly.
both inside and outside the church. So, it's been quite costly, losing friends, particularly over being quite vocal about abortion. That's been quite a challenge. Lots of people increasingly have found, and as the culture's shifted and there's increasing hostility, I've found it's been harder to try and proclaim the truth in love. Even within the family, the wider family, there's a bit of a, it's not universally welcomed, the work that I'm doing, and particularly amongst non-Christian members of the wider family. That does come as a cost, but also with great blessing as well, being able to meet with people who from all kinds across the church, faithfully standing, seeing people who've come out of homosexual lifestyles or transgender lifestyles, who've been saved and redeemed by Christ, has been a beautiful thing to see, and is the kind of thing that not many people do see. I mean, within the church, I've very supportive church friends and family, who are supportive, not always. So I got into a bit of trouble a few years ago for criticising stuff going on in the Church of England, and got a bit of media about that. But it was good to know that I had fake Christians praying and supporting me. I haven't had loads of support from the bishops in the Church of England, but it's costly, but it's worth it, and it's exciting knowing that there's a community in the church supporting, praying for me, and encouraging me, and particularly with our Wilberforce Academy as well, seeing my peers, my friends, and those that have been on it since I've been working at Christian Concern. That community really does support and pray and encourage one another.
I think for people listening and watching it, you could get hung up on the issues which keep getting mentioned, but whatever your beliefs, wherever you come from, there are some underlying issues which impact all of us. So whether you talk about freedom of speech, the right to think for yourself is being taken away. If you don't all believe the things which are put through society, through culture, we all have to kind of think the same. But if you stray from that path, whatever it is that you're thinking differently in, you can get ostracized, you can get cancelled. There are underlying issues which impact all of us if we have a different belief to society in general. What would you say to people who, they have a different belief? It may not be the same as yours, as ours, but they have a different belief, and there's a price to be paid for thinking differently? And even for people that do have sort of traditionally held biblical views, how have you personally been able to sort of stand strong in walking through that to take care of yourself, and how can other people do that? You know, it becomes harder and harder to stand up for what you believe when maybe you feel like you're an island just standing all on your own, you know?
No, that's a really helpful question. Well, I guess it's knowing Christ which makes it worth it. You know, as I said earlier, Christian Concern, Wilberforce Academy, we're not about trying to be social conservatives, anti-woke. We're about proclaiming Christ. And so knowing that it's for Jesus means that it makes everything a lot easier. Knowing that he already has the victory, he's the one who overcomes, he's the one who conquers, just gives us a lot of freedom, because actually it's not, in one sense, it's not in our hands, the results of what we do. God's sovereign, God overrules. We just need to be faithful and trust him in it. And that might be costly, but Jesus warns us about that. You know, he says he might turn father against son, but, you know, brother against sister. That, you know, there's going to be a cost to faithfulness, a cost to discipleship, and it's knowing Christ first and foremost, which means you're able to do that and to proceed through that. And so I guess for people who maybe hold views that are countercultural today, maybe more traditional views, but don't know Christ, then they need to turn to him and repent. You know, people who, we're not saved by our social conservatism, we're not saved by our views on marriage. You know, our persistent, unrepentant behavior and teaching, false teaching, may well exclude us from the kingdom. But if we don't know Christ, then there is lost as those who are promoting all this stuff in society. And so I think we as Christians need to guard against a form of co-belligerence where we forget that. We forget that the anti-woke campaigner also needs to repent and turn to Christ. And so knowing Christ is what saves us and is what keeps me going, certainly. If I thought it was my responsibility to change the culture completely, then that's a burden far too big to bear. You know, it's Christ who's in control. It's the Spirit that works in people's hearts. If you put the responsibility upon yourself, you'll be crushed. So we have that hope that he's victorious. We have that hope for the future that you know, Christ has won the victory, he is victorious, and he will have the victory. I think some verses that I've seen recently, or I've really been thinking about recently, which has surprised me, is in Jesus's words to the church in Thyatira in Revelation 2. He says, to the rest of you in Thyatira who do not hold this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, to you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden. Only hold fast what you have until I come. The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations. And so that's quite you know, quite an exciting picture for the future for us. Is that somehow in the future, you know, we're co-heirs with Christ. And one day when he returns and presents the kingdom to his Father, we'll be co-heirs with him.
Mm. A few times you've said things that remind me of previous podcasts we've done with people who have been persecuted for their faith and from persecuted nations. Some of the phrases you said is faithfulness is costly. We had one that we actually named the podcast, Faithfulness is Costly. Another one we said, he is worth it, Jesus is worth it. I think that was Andrew Brunson, who said that. Another one, the lion will see us through. And it is encouraging and alarming that you are using the same phrases that people who have been horrendously persecuted have used with us on podcasts. I mean, I see that two ways. I mean, It's encouraging because I don't think we are being persecuted yet. I think we're receiving opposition. I think that I don't know that
I think we're being marginalised, certainly.
Marginalised, yeah, but I would not like to draw the same, say we're being persecuted having interviewed some of these other people. But if we're using the same language, the same concept and the same thoughts, I would say in what you're saying, for those who have gone before us, that you're on track, if you see what I mean.
And certainly, though, there are people in England that do hold these beliefs that have been arrested and put in prison, and maybe they haven't been there for a long time, but we are heading in a direction which is concerning.
Yeah. That's why it's important that we're prepared, so it doesn't come as a surprise, because I think many of us are quite comfortable. We're not aware that opposition, that persecution may come, and we think, oh, it's only those who are a bit more extreme or those who are really vocal who are the ones who are getting into trouble. But there's the reality is that we never know what kind of circumstance we're going to be in. I mean, we've been supporting a teacher they're trying to get him struck off as a teacher because he accidentally misgendered a pupil. And so we never really know where we're going to end up or when it could happen to you.
Yeah, and it can be easy to say, oh, not in this country, only out in Asia, in the Middle East or something like that. But no, there's people in England, Canada who are being put in prison for their beliefs. And if you think, well, you might have to cross certain extreme lines to get arrested. Well, there was a lady recently in England who was standing outside an abortion clinic, but wasn't saying anything, just standing there in silence. And she was arrested for thoughts that she had in her head. So if you can get arrested for just thinking things, then you don't really have to do much as a Christian to then get arrested. You wanting to say something else?
Have you finished?
I was about to finish.
Oh, well, I don't mean have you finished. I mean to serious energy. I would really like, Ben, if you would go back as we finish and read that scripture again, because I think there's nothing like the Word of God, and read it again, because I think that is a great place that we are looking beyond this earth. We have an eternal perspective that ruling over nations and ruling and reigning with Jesus is really what we're looking for. So could you finish by reading that again?
Yeah. But to the rest of you in Thyatira, who do not hold this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, to you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden. Only hold fast what you have until I come. The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations.
Ben, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. For people listening, go check out the links in the description box. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
And
thank you so much for having me.
People who are listening, remember you are not alone. You are not alone. There are others who are standing with you. And reach out. Reach out to Christian Concern. Reach out to the Wilberforce Academy. Reach out to us if you feel that you're alone, because we want to stand with you. Put some comments in the box below and we'll be right there. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Remember, if it inspired you, share it with others so we can see more people engaged in this community.